The Downs anchorage off the coast of Kent. November 26, 1703, 11 at night. Aboard the 70-gun warship Stirling Castle, men are standing on the anchor cables. Not hauling them, standing on them, because the cables are jumping off the deck like living things, and someone has to hold them down. The ship's chaplain is on his knees between two cannons, and the captain, a man who has survived battle, is not looking at the enemy coast. He is looking at the water behind his own stern, at a patch of sea that looks calm on every chart. Because tonight, the safest anchorage in England is about to become the most lethal place on the planet. This is the Great Storm of 1703. The worst storm ever recorded on the British Isles, before or since. In one night, the Royal Navy will lose more ships than it lost in its last war. And here's the thing that nobody tells you. The wind is not what sinks them. By the end of this, you'll know what actually breaks a wooden fleet. And it's not what you think. Along the way, a sailor who survives 2 shipwrecks in one night without ever swimming a stroke. A builder who publicly begged God for this exact storm and got his wish to the letter. And a rescue where saving a drowning man paid less than robbing him. Stay with me. First, the stage. The Downs is a stretch of sheltered water between the Kent coast and a sandbank 10 miles long called the Goodwin Sands. For centuries, it's the Royal Navy's favorite parking lot. Hundreds of ships anchor here to wait out weather or wait for orders. The shelter works because the Goodwins act as a natural breakwater. But the Goodwins have a second job. At low tide, the sands rise out of the sea, a wet, brown island where men have walked and, no joke, later even played cricket. At high tide, they vanish, and a ship pushed onto them doesn't wreck the normal way. The sand is soft. It grips the hull, holds it still, and lets the sea take the ship apart, piece by piece. Sailors of the age had a name for the Goodwins, the ship swallower. Remember that name. It has an appetite, and tonight it gets fed. November 1703 is the middle of a war. England is fighting France over the Spanish throne. The fleet is just home from the Mediterranean, worn out, anchored in the Downs to refit. And the weather has been wrong for 2 straight weeks. Gales from the southwest, one after another, like someone knocking before kicking in the door. Barometers, a fairly new toy in 1703, start dropping on the 26th, and they keep dropping past marks their owners have never seen. One observer in Essex watches his mercury fall so low, he assumes the instrument is broken. It isn't broken. What's coming is what meteorologists today would call an extratropical cyclone, with hurricane-force winds. Modern reconstructions put the gusts somewhere above 100 miles per hour. In 1703, nobody has those words. What they have is the sky turning the color of a bruise, and old sailors going quiet. Around midnight, the storm arrives, and it does not build. It detonates. Picture what a 100-mile-per-hour wind does to a sailing ship at anchor. The masts, even with every sail furled, act like levers. Bare rigging alone catches enough wind to heel a 70-gun ship onto her side. Crews grab axes and cut their own masts down, dumping 30 meters of oak and a fortune in rigging into the sea, just to reduce the lever. The Navy's ships in the Downs are doing exactly this at 1 in the morning, in the dark, on decks tilting like a roof. Now the anchors. A ship of the line rides on cables of hemp as thick as a man's thigh, tied to anchors weighing a couple of tons. Sounds solid. But an anchor doesn't nail a ship to the planet. It's a hook in mud, and its grip is measured against normal weather. When the wind's push exceeds the mud's grip, the anchor doesn't break. It plows. The ship starts dragging backward, slowly, evenly, a parking brake made of dirt,
sliding. And behind the anchored fleet, downwind, waits the Goodwin. Look, this is the actual mechanism of the disaster. Not one dramatic wave, just physics, patiently winning a tug-of-war, 1 meter at a time, toward a sandbank that eats ships. And while the officers watch the cables, below decks the ship is fighting a second war nobody romanticizes. A wooden hull in a storm doesn't leak in one place. It leaks everywhere, because the whole structure is flexing, working every seam like a loose tooth. The pumps run non-stop, 4 men to a handle, changed out when their arms quit.
Gun crews double-lash the cannons, because a loose 30-hundredweight gun on a rolling deck is a battering ram with no loyalty. One breaking free can punch through the hull from the inside and do the storm's job for it. There's no dry clothing, no hot food, no light except a couple of storm lanterns swinging like censers. And under all of it, that sound. Men said you felt it in your teeth before you heard it, the deep grind of the ship's own timbers chewing against each other. A wooden warship in a hurricane isn't a shelter. It's a machine that buys you time, and only for as long as you keep paying. Between 1 and 3 in the morning, the cables start to go. Some snap, some simply drag. In the blackness, nobody can see the sands. They can only hear them. A low, continuous roar of surf that gets closer every time you check. 4 warships go onto the Goodwins that night. The Northumberland, 70 guns, driven onto the sand and taken apart by dawn. Every man aboard is lost. Around 250 of them. The Restoration, 70 guns, same sands, same result. Not one survivor. The Mary, the flagship of Rear Admiral Basil Beaumont, breaks up with the admiral aboard. Out of her whole company, the sea returns exactly 1 man. Hold on to that 1 man. We'll come back to him. And the Stirling Castle, the ship we opened with, Chaplain on his knees. She strikes the sands too, and starts to break. But she strikes in a spot and an hour that leave part of her crew clinging to the wreck until boats can reach them. Around 70 men come off alive, out of nearly 350. The captain is not among them. And the Goodwins are only 1 page of the night's ledger. The same hours are collecting ships all along the coast. At Spithead, the warship Newcastle goes down. At Yarmouth Roads, the Reserve. In the dockyard at Chatham, inside the Navy's own home river, the Vanguard, a 90-gun ship with nobody aboard, is simply pushed over and sunk at her moorings, like furniture knocked over in a burglary. And one of the biggest ships in the fleet, the 90-gun Association, has her cables torn away in the Downs and gets driven, helpless, stern first into the dark, out of the anchorage, across the entire North Sea. Her crew fights her the whole way and cannot turn her. When the wind finally lets go, the lookouts are staring at the coast of Norway. An English battleship, blown to Scandinavia like a paper cup across a parking lot. It takes her weeks to work her way home. Her crew got the good version of the night. They had sea room. Remember that word. It's about to become the whole point of this story. By sunrise on November 27th, the Downs, England's safe harbour, looks like the aftermath of a lost battle. Masts sticking out of the water, wreckage in a line along 10 miles of sand. And then the tide goes out, and the Goodwin Sands do the cruelest thing in this whole story. They rise. And there are men standing on them. Sailors from the wrecked ships, dozens of them, by some accounts hundreds, are alive on the wet sand in the middle of the sea, waving at the Kent coast. Everyone in the town of Deal can see them, tiny figures on a brown island that exists for about 6 hours. Then the tide comes back, and the island goes under, with everything on it. It is a rescue situation with a countdown clock that every person on shore understands perfectly. And the boats of Deal go out, toward the wrecks, not toward the men. Because here's a fact about the law in 1703. Salvage pays. Cargo, rope, brass, anything off a wreck, a boatman can legally sell. Pulling a freezing sailor off a sandbank pays nothing. The boatmen of Deal are poor men doing arithmetic, and the arithmetic says, rob the wreck first. I told you saving a man would pay worse than robbing him. That wasn't a figure of speech. One person in Deal refuses the arithmetic. The town's mayor, Thomas Powell. He demands the use of the customs boats, gets refused, and effectively commandeers them anyway, offering the boatman payment out of his own pocket, 5 shillings a head if the head is alive. On his own money, boat crews start running to the sands. They pull somewhere around 200 men off the Goodwins before the tide closes the window. The men they don't reach, you already know. The sea doesn't do overtime. And Powell isn't done paying. 200 half-drowned sailors are now standing in his town with nothing. No shoes, no coats, no food, because the Navy's system for them has essentially sunk. So the mayor keeps spending bread, beer, dry clothes, lodging, all out of the same private pocket, and burial for the bodies the tide delivers over the following days. Then he writes to the authorities, asking to be reimbursed for saving the Queen's sailors. By the accounts that survive, the repayment never hurried to arrive. A man who outspent the government on its own navy got, mostly, the satisfaction of having done it. Look, if you want one sentence that explains the entire administrative machine of 1703, robbing a wreck was an industry, saving its crew was a charity. The storm didn't invent that, it just lit it up. And the one survivor of the Mary? His name is recorded as Thomas Atkins. The story told afterwards goes like this. When the Mary broke up, a wave lifted him off her deck and dropped him onto the wreck of the Stirling Castle, the only ship in the line with survivors. When the Stirling Castle's remains shifted, a second wave threw him into one of the rescue boats. 2 shipwrecks, 1 night, and the man reportedly never swam a stroke. I can't fully verify Atkins, nobody in 1703 could either. But that's the account that came off the sands, and honestly, no one has invented a better one since. Meanwhile, and this is the part people forget, the storm is not a sea story. It's chewing through the entire south of England at the same time. In London, roughly 2,000 chimney stacks come down in a few hours, falling through roofs onto sleeping families. Queen Anne is moved into a cellar under St. James's Palace, while the palace loses part of its roof above her. In the town of Wells, the Bishop of Bath and Wells, Richard Kidder, is asleep beside his wife in the bishop's palace when a chimney stack comes through the ceiling directly over their bed. Neither of them survives to hear the wind die down. A bishop, the professional explainer of what storms mean, becomes, in 1 second, part of the storm's meaning. The sermon writers would spend months on that one. The lead sheeting of Westminster Abbey's roof, tons of metal, peels up and rolls like parchment. Across the country, hundreds of windmills are wrecked. Some of them catch fire in the middle of a rainstorm because their wooden brakes, fighting the spinning sails, generate enough friction to ignite. Think about that image. Windmills burning in the rain. Even the disasters that night were inventing new physics. On the Thames, ships tear loose and pile onto each other in heaps. Witnesses describe hundreds of vessels jammed into tangles between the bridges, hulls climbing onto hulls like ice floes. Grass miles inland tastes of salt for days afterward, because the storm has been picking up the sea itself and throwing it over the countryside. Windows facing the coast are crusted white, as if the ocean had licked the houses. And 14 miles off Plymouth, on a wave-washed rock called the Eddystone, stands the storm's most personal victim. the Eddystone Lighthouse, the first lighthouse in the world built on an open ocean rock. Before it existed, the Eddystone Reef was a serial killer with a schedule. Ships bound for Plymouth simply vanished on it. In some years, several in a winter. Everyone agreed a light was needed. Everyone also agreed it was impossible. You'd have to build a tower on a rock that spends half its life underwater, in the open Atlantic, with hand tools from a rowing boat. The man who didn't agree was Henry Winstanley, engineer, showman, professional eccentric. His house in Essex was famous for trick furniture, chairs that grabbed your arms, a slipper on the floor that summoned a ghost when you kicked it. He owned a novelty theatre in London. And in 1696, this carnival engineer started bolting a tower to the most feared rock in the Channel. The sea sent its regards immediately. One day a French privateer raided the site, England and France being at war, wrecked the work, and carried Winstanley off to France as a prisoner. And then, the story goes, Louis XIV found out and ordered him released with an apology, saying France was at war with England, not with humanity. Even the enemy king wanted that lighthouse built. Winstanley went straight back to the rock. By 1698, the light was burning. The first offshore lighthouse in history, an ornate wooden tower with a gallery and candles, looking less like infrastructure and more like a chess piece that had wandered into the ocean. He rebuilt it bigger and stronger the next year when the sea showed him his mistakes. And in the winters that followed, while the light burned, not a single ship was lost on the Eddystone. His impossible machine worked. Which is exactly why his standard answer to doubters stung so well. He said he wished to be inside his lighthouse during the greatest storm that ever blew under the face of heaven, so he could watch it hold. On the night of November 26th, Henry Winstanley is inside his lighthouse, out on the rock overseeing repairs. He has, at last, exactly what he asked for. In the morning, the Eddystone rock is bare. The tower is gone entirely, down to the iron stumps. And Winstanley is gone with it, along with every man who was out there. On shore, they said the sea took the lighthouse as a personal matter. Here's the darker way to put it. The man built a machine to argue with the ocean, and the ocean accepted the debate, and won it in one night. Let's do the full bill, because the numbers are the story. The Royal Navy loses 13 ships in that one storm, including 4 ships of the line on the Goodwin Sands alone, and around 1,500 trained sailors. To feel the scale, that's more warships than England had lost to enemy action in years of fighting France. One night of weather outscored the French Navy. Across land and sea together, the death toll is guessed at 8,000 or more. Guessed because in 1703 nobody is counting drowned fishermen, crushed farmhands and vanished coasters. The insurance men of London, staring at the claims, come close to ruin. Some contemporaries called it the nation's worst calamity since the plague. The difference? The plague took a year. This took about 6 hours. Now, England in 1703 needs someone to explain what just happened, and the official explanation machine, the church, delivers its verdict. The storm was the anger of God at the sins of the nation. The government proclaims a national day of fasting for January 19, 1704, and the whole country formally apologizes to the sky. That is, seriously, the state-level response. Repentance as disaster relief. But in London, there's also a broke, disgraced pamphlet writer with a different instinct. His name is Daniel Defoe. Yes, the future author of Robinson Crusoe, but that book is 16 years away. In this moment, he's a bankrupt who spent 3 days in the pillory that very summer for a satirical pamphlet, and he's just watched the storm nearly demolish his own roof. Defoe does something that, as far as anyone can tell, nobody has done before. He puts advertisements in the newspapers asking ordinary people across the country to mail him their eyewitness accounts of the storm. Not omens, not sermons, facts. What happened at your house? At what hour? What did the barometer read? Who was lost? Around 60 letters come back. Farmers, vicars, ship captains. In 1704, Defoe stitches them into a book he calls The Storm, and that book is arguably the birth of disaster journalism. The first time a catastrophe was documented as a mass of verified, named, located testimony instead of a moral fable. The church answered the storm with a fast. Defoe answered it with a database. One of those two methods eventually became science. Guess which? So, back to the question this whole night has been asking. What actually destroys a wooden fleet? The wind? The thing everyone remembers? Look at where the ships actually died, and the answer flips. Out in the open Atlantic that night, ships take a beating, lose masts, lose men overboard, but overwhelmingly, they live. The ships that die on the edges of the land, on the Goodwins, on the Thames banks, on the coasts of the Channel. Because a wooden ship is built to lose an argument with the wind gracefully. She runs, she bends, she gives way. What she cannot survive is being stopped. The sand, the shore, the anchorage, everything that means safety in fair weather becomes the hammer in a storm. Sailors of the age knew this cold. Given sea room, you ride it out. Caught against the land, you're already a wreck with a delay on it. That's the answer. The sea doesn't sink ships. The land does. The Downs killed the fleet precisely because it was the safe place. Safety, that night, was a wall to be crushed against, and every anchor was a hand holding the fleet still while the storm swung.
The Navy's own conclusions after 1703 point the same way. More urgency about deep-water harbours, about lighthouses, about not trusting sheltered roadsteads with a whole fleet in the wrong season. The Eddystone Rock got a new lighthouse within a few years, and the Crown put standing money behind keeping lights burning. The storm, in other words, did what storms always do at scale. It wrote policy with wreckage. They never gave it a name, by the way. No list, no letter, no Hurricane Anne, just the Great Storm, the One. 3 centuries of British weather since, and nothing has taken the title off it. And the Goodwin Sands are still out there, still swallowing the occasional keel, still rising twice a day, 10 miles of innocent-looking brown sand where, at low tide, men have stood scoring cricket matches on top of 2,000 dead ships. The ship swallower is patient. It can wait for the next fleet that thinks it's parked somewhere safe. If this kind of history is your thing, the kind where the sea keeps receipts, the next one's already loading. How pirate crews split a captured fortune, shares, scales and all, and why the split was fairer than the King's Navy ever managed. Subscribe so it finds you, and tell me below. That night in the Downs, would you have cut the anchor cable and run for open water, or held on and trusted the ground? Because every captain on the Goodwins had to pick one. In the dark, with the roar getting closer.